The crimson silk gown caught the light from the crystal chandeliers as I moved through the Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall. My presence creating ripples of curiosity and speculation among the assembled guests. The annual Arts Patron Gala was in full swing. 500 of the city's cultural elite gathered to celebrate their philanthropic generosity while carefully maintaining the social hierarchies that made such charity necessary. "Who is that woman in red?" I heard Mrs. Vivian Ashworth whisper to her cluster of admirers, her voice pitched just low enough to seem discreet while ensuring maximum distribution of her curiosity. "I don't recognize her, and I know everyone who matters in this city." I continued my slow circuit of the ballroom, accepting champagne from passing servers and observing the careful choreography of high society with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture. The irony wasn't lost on me. These people were discussing me as if I were a fascinating specimen while having no idea that I knew exactly who they were and what they represented. "She's absolutely stunning," added Miranda Blackstone, leaning closer to Vivian's circle with the kind of conspiratorial excitement that fueled society gossip. "That dress must have cost a fortune, and the jewelry, those aren't costume pieces. But I've never seen her at any of our events before." "Perhaps she's from out of town," suggested Margaret Whitmore, the museum's board chair, her voice carrying the diplomatic caution of someone who had learned not to make assumptions about unfamiliar faces at charity events. "We do get visitors from other cultural centers for events like this." I smiled to myself, sipping my champagne while listening to their speculation. If they had looked more carefully at the evening's program, if they had paid attention to the list of honorees, if they had bothered to research the recipients of tonight's awards, they might have recognized me. But their world was so insular, so focused on their own social circles, that they couldn't imagine someone from outside their sphere belonging in their space. "Excuse me," a young man approached me with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was either a junior staff member or an aspiring social climber. "I'm David Chen from the museum's development office. I don't believe we've met, and I wanted to welcome you to tonight's gala." "Thank you," I replied, extending my hand with a smile that revealed nothing about my identity or my reasons for being there. "It's a beautiful event. The museum has done an exceptional job with the presentation." "Are you visiting from another city?" David asked, his question echoing the assumptions I'd been hearing throughout the evening. "We always love to welcome patrons from other cultural institutions." "In a way," I said, enjoying the ambiguity of my response. "Though I'm quite familiar with this museum's work. I've been following their programming for years." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Dr. Patricia Williams, the museum's chief curator, who had been watching our interaction with obvious curiosity. "David," she said, joining our conversation with the kind of practiced grace that came from years of managing social interactions at cultural events, "I see you've met our mysterious guest. I was hoping someone might introduce us." "I'm afraid I haven't had the pleasure of learning the lady's name," David admitted, clearly hoping that Dr. Williams might provide the identification he'd been seeking. "How intriguing," Dr. Williams said, studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to place a half-remembered artwork. "You seem familiar, but I can't quite place where we might have met." "Perhaps you've seen my photograph," I suggested, offering another cryptic clue that they were unlikely to decode without additional context. The mystery of my identity was clearly spreading through the ballroom, with small clusters of guests glancing in my direction and engaging in animated discussions about who I might be and why I was there. The speculation ranged from visiting European nobility to reclusive tech billionaires, each theory more elaborate than the last. "Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's host announced from the stage, "if you could please take your seats, we're ready to begin tonight's program." I made my way to my assigned table, noting with amusement that I had been seated at table 12 far from the head table, where the museum's major donors and board members held court, but close enough to observe their reactions to the evening's proceedings. My table mates were a mix of mid-level donors, arts professionals, and community leaders who represented the museum's broader constituency. "I'm sorry," said the woman seated next to me. A gallery owner named Sarah Kim, who seemed genuinely friendly rather than merely curious. "But I have to ask, are you the mystery woman everyone's been discussing?" The entire room is buzzing with speculation about who you are. "I suppose I am," I replied with a smile. "Though I'm surprised by all the attention. I'm just here to support the arts, like everyone else." "Well, you've certainly made an impression," Sarah continued. "I've overheard at least 6 different theories about your identity, ranging from European royalty to tech entrepreneur to reclusive art collector. What do you think?" I asked, curious about her assessment. "I think you're someone who understands the power of presentation and the value of mystery," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "The way you carry yourself, the quality of your dress, the confidence in your demeanor, clearly someone of substance. But you're also enjoying the speculation, which suggests you have a reason for maintaining your anonymity." Her observation was perceptive, and I found myself genuinely impressed by her insight. "You're very observant," I said. "What gave me away?" "The way you're watching everyone else," Sarah explained. "You're not trying to see and be seen like most people at these events. You're studying the room, analyzing the interactions, observing the social dynamics. That suggests you have a specific purpose beyond just attending a charity gala." Before I could respond, the lights dimmed and the evening's program began. The museum's director took the stage to welcome the assembled guests and outline the evening's agenda, which included presentations about the museum's recent acquisitions, upcoming exhibitions, and community outreach programs. "Tonight," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "we celebrate not just our institution's achievements, but the individuals whose vision and generosity make our work possible. We're particularly honored to recognize someone whose contributions to arts education have transformed how we think about cultural accessibility and community engagement." I felt a flutter of anticipation as the presentation moved toward the moment when my anonymity would end and the evening's real purpose would be revealed. "Our Community Impact Award recognizes individuals who have used the arts to create meaningful change in underserved communities," the director continued. "This year's recipient has developed innovative programs that bring museum-quality arts education to public schools, community centers, and neighborhood organizations throughout the city." The screen behind him lit up with images from the programs I had developed over the past 5 years: children working with professional artists, teenagers creating murals that transformed vacant lots, elderly residents sharing their cultural traditions through storytelling and craft workshops. Her work has reached over 10,000 community members, the director explained, creating opportunities for artistic expression and cultural preservation that might not otherwise exist. She has proven that the arts belong not just in museums and galleries, but in the everyday spaces where people live, work, and build community. I could see heads turning throughout the ballroom as guests began to realize that the evening's honoree was someone they hadn't recognized, someone whose work had been happening in communities they rarely visited or considered. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director announced, "please join me in welcoming this year's Community Impact Award recipient, Dr. Elena Rodriguez." The applause began as I stood and made my way to the stage. But I could hear the ripple of surprise and recognition that spread through the audience as they realized that the mysterious woman in red was actually the evening's guest of honor. The speculation about my identity had been resolved, but the questions about my work and my presence in their world were just beginning. As I reached the podium and looked out at the sea of facisms, showing genuine appreciation, others displaying the kind of polite attention that masked deeper discomfort, I realized that the evening's real purpose wasn't just to receive an award. It was to challenge their assumptions about who belonged in their world and what kinds of contributions deserved recognition. The woman in red they had been gossiping about was about to become someone they couldn't ignore, dismiss, or categorize according to their comfortable social hierarchies. The mystery of my identity had been solved, but the mystery of what my presence meant for their understanding of arts philanthropy was just beginning to unfold. The The silence that followed my introduction was profound and telling, not the respectful quiet of an audience preparing to listen, but the uncomfortable hush of people processing information that challenged their fundamental assumptions. I stood at the podium, looking out at 500 faces that reflected varying degrees of surprise, confusion, and dawning recognition. "Thank you," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the museum's acoustically perfect Great Hall. When I accepted this award, I was told it would be presented at the city's most prestigious arts gala, attended by the people who shape our cultural landscape. What I wasn't told was that I would spend the first hour of the evening listening to those same people speculate about my identity as if I were an exotic artifact rather than a colleague in the work of arts advocacy. A murmur ran through the audience, and I could see several guests shifting uncomfortably as they realized their conversations had been overheard and would now be addressed publicly. I heard myself described as mysterious, intriguing, possibly foreign, I continued. I heard speculation about my wealth, my connections, my reasons for being here. What I didn't hear was curiosity about my work, interest in the communities I serve, or questions about the programs that earned me this recognition. The observation hung in the air like an accusation, and I could see people beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be a typical acceptance speech filled with gracious platitudes and humble appreciation. The assumption seemed to be that if you didn't recognize me, I must be from somewhere else, another city, another country, another social sphere entirely. It apparently didn't occur to anyone that I might be from here, working in communities that exist just miles from this museum but remain invisible to the people who claim to champion arts. Accessibility. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, which showed a map of the city with the museum at its center and dozens of red dots, marking the locations where my programs operated. These dots represent the schools, community centers, and neighborhood organizations where I've been working for the past 5 years, I explained. The average distance from this museum is less than 3 miles. The average income in these communities is less than $30,000 per year. The average arts funding per capita is less than $5 annually. The statistics were stark, but they were also designed to highlight the proximity and the disparity that characterized the relationship between the museum's wealthy patrons and the communities that surrounded them. I've been developing arts education programs in these communities since I completed my PhD in arts education from Columbia, I continued. I've written grants, trained teachers, organized exhibitions, and created opportunities for artistic expression that have reached thousands of children and families. Yet tonight was the first time most of you had ever seen my face, heard my name, or learned about my work. Not because I've been hiding, but because the communities I serve are invisible to the people who control arts, funding, and cultural programming in this city. The accusation was direct and uncomfortable, and I could see board members exchanging glances that suggested they were calculating the implications of what I was saying. Dr. Rodriguez interrupted Margaret Whitmore from her position at the head table, her voice carrying the diplomatic authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "We're certainly grateful for your work in community arts education. But surely you understand that the museum's programming must serve a broad constituency, not just specific neighborhoods." "Mrs. Whitmore," I replied, "I understand perfectly. The question is whether you understand that your broad constituency has been remarkably narrow in practice." I clicked to the next slide, which showed demographic data about the museum's membership, board composition, and program participation. 87% of your members live in 5 zip codes, I read from the data. 93% of your board members attended private universities. 74% of your education program participants come from families with household incomes above $100,000. These numbers suggest that the museum's idea of serving a broad constituency means serving the same narrow slice of the population in slightly different ways. The data was damning, but it was also undeniable. The museum's own records revealed the extent to which their programming reflected and reinforced existing inequalities rather than addressing them. But the most telling statistic, I continued, is this one. In the past 5 years, the museum has spent 2.3 million in Angeles, fundraising events, and honor kultiviashek. In the same period, ETHA spent 340,000 on community outreach and arts education in underserved neighborhoods. You spend 7 times more money celebrating your generosity than you do actually serving the communities that need arts programming most. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see donors calculating the implications of having their charitable priorities exposed so starkly, board members considering how to respond to such direct criticism, and staff members trying to gauge whether their jobs were in jeopardy. Dr. Rodriguez, said Dr. Patricia Williams, the chief curator, "While we appreciate your research, I think you may be oversimplifying the challenges of museum programming. Community outreach requires different resources and approaches than traditional exhibitions and education programs." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "It requires going into communities instead of expecting them to come to you. It requires listening to what people actually want rather than deciding what they need. It requires sharing power instead of maintaining control. It also requires recognizing that artistic excellence exists in communities that have been systematically excluded from cultural institutions, not just in the collections and exhibitions that reflect the tastes of wealthy donors." I clicked to the next slide, which showed photographs from my community program's children creating sophisticated murals, teenagers performing original poetry, elderly residents teaching traditional crafts to younger generations. "This is what arts programming looks like when it's actually community-based," I explained. "When it emerges from local knowledge and addresses local needs rather than being imposed from outside by people who've never lived in these neighborhoods. The quality of work being produced in these programs rivals anything in your permanent collection. The level of engagement exceeds anything in your formal education programs. The community impact surpasses anything achieved by your most expensive exhibitions. Yet, none of this work has ever been featured in the museum's galleries. None of these artists have been included in your programming, and none of these communities have been invited to participate in events like tonight's gala." The accusations were mounting, and I could see the discomfort spreading through the audience as people realized that their comfortable assumptions about arts, philanthropy, were being systematically dismantled. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Harrison Blackwood, a real estate developer whose foundation was one of the museum's major supporters. "That we abandon our institutional mission to focus exclusively on community programming. I'm proposing that you expand your understanding of what institutional mission means," I replied. "That you recognize community engagement as central to your purpose rather than peripheral to it. That you acknowledge the artistic excellence that exists outside your traditional networks and find ways to support and showcase it. I'm also proposing that you examine whether your current approach to arts philanthropy is actually serving the arts or just serving yourselves." The challenge was direct and personal, forcing the audience to confront the possibility that their charitable giving was more about social positioning than social impact. Dr. Rodriguez, Margaret Whitmore said, her voice carrying a note of warning. "I think you may be overstepping the bounds of appropriate discourse for this venue. We're here to celebrate the arts, not to engage in political criticism of our supporters." "Mrs. Whitmore," I replied, "the arts are inherently political. Every decision about what to exhibit, what to fund, and who to include is a political decision that reflects values and priorities. The question isn't whether we should discuss politics at an arts event, it's whether we should acknowledge the political implications of our choices or continue pretending that cultural programming is somehow neutral and apolitical." As the tension in the room continued to build, I realized that the evening had become something none of us had anticipated. What was supposed to be a celebration of community arts programming had evolved into a confrontation about power, privilege, and the purpose of cultural institutions. The woman in red they had gossiped about was forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about their own role in perpetuating the very inequalities they claimed to address through their charitable giving. The silence that surrounded me now wasn't just surprise, it was the sound of assumptions crumbling, of comfortable narratives being challenged, of people being forced to examine whether their good intentions were producing good outcomes. The tension in the Great Hall was palpable as I prepared to reveal the deeper purpose behind my evening's performance. The museum's elegant setting with its soaring ceilings, marble columns, and priceless artworks provided a stark contrast to the uncomfortable truths I was about to expose about the institution's relationship with the communities it claimed to serve. Before I continue, I said, pulling out a folder that had been waiting beside the podium, I want to share some additional research that I think will interest this audience. Over the past 6 months, I've been conducting a comprehensive study of arts philanthropy in our city, examining not just what institutions say they do, but what they actually accomplish. I clicked to a new slide that showed a detailed analysis of funding flows, program outcomes, and community impact across all major cultural institutions in the city. What I discovered, I continued, is a pattern of what I call philanthropic theater. Elaborate performances of charitable concern that generate significant social capital for donors while producing minimal actual benefit for the communities they purport to serve. The phrase philanthropic theater seemed to resonate through the audience, and I could see people leaning forward with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. For example, I said, clicking to a specific case study, last year this museum received a $500,000 grant from the Whitmore Foundation to develop innovative community engagement programming. The grant was celebrated at a gala, much like tonight's, with extensive media coverage about the museum's commitment to serving underserved populations. I paused, letting the audience remember the fanfare that had surrounded that particular announcement. The actual programming consisted of 4 workshops held at the museum on weekday afternoons, requiring participants to take time off work and arrange transportation to attend. Total community participation, 47 people, cost per participant, approximately $10,600. Meanwhile, I continued, the same 500,000 Coldhigh funded in EBA's programs Fortree, reaching over 3,000 participants at a cost of less than $170 per person. The comparison was stark and damning, illustrating the vast difference between programming designed for institutional convenience and programming designed for community impact. But the most revealing aspect of this case study, I said, isn't the inefficiency, it's the intentionality. The museum's programming was designed to fail at community engagement while succeeding at donor cultivation. How so? Asked Dr. Williams, her voice carrying genuine curiosity mixed with obvious concern. Because the real audience for that programming wasn't the community. It was the foundation board members who wanted to feel good about their charitable giving without actually changing the power dynamics that create the need for charity in the first place. I clicked to the next slide, which showed photographs from the museum's community workshops alongside images from my neighborhood programs. Look at these pictures, I said. The museum's workshops show small groups of people sitting in formal classroom settings, receiving instruction about art, history, and museum collections. My programs show large groups of community members creating original artwork, sharing cultural traditions, and using artistic expression to address issues that matter to their daily lives. One approach treats community members as empty vessels to be filled with institutional knowledge. The other treats them as creative agents with valuable perspectives and experiences. One approach reinforces the idea that legitimate art happens in museums and is created by professionally trained artists. The other demonstrates that artistic excellence emerges from communities and reflects lived experience. The contrast was visual and visceral, making it impossible for the audience to ignore the fundamental differences between the two approaches. Dr. Rodriguez, interrupted Harrison Blackwood, while your community programs may be admirable, surely you understand that museums have educational responsibilities that go beyond just facilitating community expression. We're stewards of cultural heritage, not just community centers. Mr. Blackwood, I replied, You're absolutely right that museums are stewards of cultural heritage. The question is whose heritage you're stewarding and whose heritage you're ignoring. I clicked to a slide showing the museum's collection, demographics, the geographic origins, cultural contexts, and historical periods represented in their permanent holdings. 78% of this museum's collection represents European and European artistic traditions. I read. 12% represents Asian cultures. 6% represents African and African American traditions, and 4% represents Indigenous American cultures. Yet the city's population is 34% Latino, 28% African American, 18% Asian American, and 3% Native American. The museum's collection reflects the cultural heritage of less than 20% of the people who live here. So when you talk about stewarding cultural heritage, you're really talking about stewarding one particular cultural heritage while systematically excluding others. The demographic data was undeniable, and it highlighted the extent to which the museum's mission was shaped by the preferences and perspectives of its wealthy, predominantly white donor base. But there's an even deeper problem, I continued. The museum doesn't just exclude other cultural traditions from its collection, it actively undermines them through its programming and messaging. What do you mean? Asked Sarah Kim, the gallery owner from my dinner table, who seemed genuinely interested in understanding my critique. I mean that the museum's educational programs consistently present European artistic traditions as universal standards of excellence while treating other traditions as exotic curiosities or historical artifacts. Children from Latino families are taught that real art looks like Renaissance paintings, not like the murals and folk art traditions that reflect their own cultural heritage. African American students learn about abstract expressionism, but not about the rich traditions of African textile arts that influenced contemporary design. The museum's programming doesn't just fail to include diverse communities, it actively teaches those communities that their cultural traditions are less valuable, less sophisticated, less worthy of preservation and celebration. The accusation was serious and personal, striking at the heart of the museum's educational mission and its impact on the communities it claimed to serve. Dr. Rodriguez, Margaret Whitmore said, her voice carrying a note of defensiveness. I think you're being unfair to our education staff. We've made significant efforts to diversify our programming and include multiple cultural perspectives. Have you? I asked, pulling out another folder of documentation. Because I've analyzed 5 years of your educational programming, and what I found suggests otherwise. I clicked to a slide showing the museum's education program descriptions, instructor backgrounds, and participant demographics over the past 5 years. 91% of your education programs focus on European artistic traditions. I read 87% of your instructors have formal training in European art history or studio practices. 73% of your program participants are white, despite the fact that the surrounding community is majority people of color. Your diverse programming consists primarily of special events during Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month token gestures that reinforce the idea that non-European cultures are special topics rather than integral parts of artistic heritage. The data was comprehensive and damning, revealing the extent to which the museum's efforts at inclusion were superficial rather than substantive. But the most troubling discovery, I continued, was this. The museum has actively rejected partnership proposals from community organizations that could have provided authentic cultural programming and genuine community engagement. I clicked to the final slide, which showed a list of rejected proposals from Latino cultural centers, African American arts organizations, and immigrant community groups. Over the past 3 years, I said, 17 different community organizations have approached this museum with proposals for collaborative programming. These organizations offer to share their cultural expertise, provide access to their communities, and create programming that would genuinely serve diverse populations. Every single proposal was rejected. Not because they lacked quality or feasibility, but because they would have required the museum to share power. Acknowledge other forms of expertise, and recognize that cultural authority doesn't reside exclusively in academic institutions. The revelation was devastating, providing concrete evidence that the museum's failure to serve diverse communities wasn't accidental or inevitably was the result of deliberate choices that prioritized institutional control over community engagement. So when you ask what I'm proposing, I said, looking directly at Margaret Whitmore, I'm proposing that this museum and institutions like it acknowledge that they have been part of the problem rather than part of the solution. I'm proposing that you recognize community organizations as partners rather than subjects. That you treat diverse cultural traditions as sources of wisdom rather than objects of study, and that you measure success by community impact rather than donor satisfaction. Most importantly, I'm proposing that you admit that the communities you've been ignoring possess the very cultural wealth and artistic excellence that you claim to champion. As I concluded my presentation and prepared to leave the podium, I realized that the evening had accomplished something I hadn't dared to hope for. The woman in red they had gossiped about had forced them to confront not just their assumptions about who belonged in their world, but their understanding of what their world was actually accomplishing. The discovery wasn't just that they had failed to recognize MIT, was that they had failed to recognize the communities I represented, the expertise I embodied, and the alternatives I offered to their comfortable but ineffective approach to arts philanthropy. The silence that surrounded me now was the sound of an entire worldview being challenged, questioned, and potentially transformed. The aftermath of my presentation was unlike anything the Metropolitan Museum had ever experienced. Instead of the polite applause and gracious transitions that typically followed award ceremonies, the Great Hall buzzed with intense conversations, heated debates, and the kind of uncomfortable soul-searching that occurs when fundamental assumptions are challenged in public. I remained on stage for a moment, watching as the audience grappled with the implications of what they'd just heard. Some faces showed genuine shock and concern, others displayed defensive anger, but many reflected something that looked like recognition, the uncomfortable acknowledgement that my observations were accurate, even if they were unwelcome. Dr. Rodriguez, Margaret Whitmore, approached the podium with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested damage control, rather than genuine engagement. I think there may have been some misunderstandings about the museum's mission and programming. Perhaps we could discuss these concerns privately, away from the public forum. Mrs. Whitmore, I replied, stepping down from the stage but maintaining my position in the center of the room. These aren't private concerns. They're public issues that affect thousands of community members who have been systematically excluded from cultural programming that claims to serve them. But surely, you understand that airing institutional criticisms at a fundraising event is inappropriate and potentially damaging to our ability to continue supporting the arts. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the still silent hall. You're concerned that honest discussion of your institution's failures might threaten your ability to raise money from donors who prefer to feel good about their charitable giving rather than examine its actual impact. The exchange was being watched by every person in the room, and I could see reporters discreetly taking notes while board members calculated the potential public relations implications. Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Patricia Williams interjected. While we appreciate your passion for community engagement, I think you may be overlooking the complexity of institutional change. Museums can't simply abandon their core mission to chase every trend in social programming. Dr. Williams, I replied, what you call chasing trends, I call fulfilling your stated mission. Unless, of course, your mission statement about serving the entire community was never intended to be taken seriously. I pulled out my phone and read directly from the museum's website. The Metropolitan Museum is committed to making the arts accessible to all members of our diverse community, fostering cultural understanding through inclusive programming that celebrates the full spectrum of human creative expression. Either those words mean something, or they're just marketing language designed to make donors feel good about supporting an institution that serves only people like themselves. The challenge was direct and public. forcing the museum's leadership to either defend their actual practices or acknowledge the gap between their stated values and their operational reality. "Perhaps," said a voice from the audience, "we should hear from some community members about their experiences with arts programming in the city." I turned to see Sofia Martinez, one of the community organizers I'd been working with, standing near the back of the hall. She was accompanied by several other residents from the neighborhoods where my programs operated, people who had somehow gained access to an event that was typically closed to anyone without significant wealth or social connections. "Sophia," I said, recognizing the strategic importance of this moment, "how did you get here tonight?" "We bought tickets," she replied simply, her voice carrying the quiet dignity of someone who refused to be intimidated by surroundings designed to exclude her. "When we heard you were receiving an award, we wanted to be here to support you and to see what this museum considers community engagement." The revelation that community members had purchased tickets to attend the gala created another ripple of discomfort through the audience. These weren't invited guests or special program participants. They were paying customers who had every right to be there, but whose presence clearly made many attendees uncomfortable. "And what have you observed tonight?" I asked. "We've observed a room full of people spending more money on their outfits than our families earn in a month, celebrating their generosity while having no idea that the communities they claim to serve are sitting right here among them." Sophia's observation was devastating in its simplicity, highlighting the fundamental disconnect between the museum's wealthy patrons and the communities they purported to help. "We've also observed," continued Miguel Santos, a high school art teacher from one of the neighborhoods where I worked, "a lot of conversation about serving diverse communities from people who have never set foot in those communities and wouldn't recognize their residents if they were sitting at the same table." Which, as it turns out, added Carmen Rodriguez, a community artist whose work had been featured in several of my programs. The revelation that community members had been present throughout the evening, listening to the speculation about the mysterious woman in red and the discussions about community engagement, created a moment of profound moral reversal. The observers had become the observed. The subjects of charitable concern had become witnesses to philanthropic theater. "How long have you been here?" asked Harrison Blackwood, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been embarrassment. "Since the beginning," Sophia replied. "We heard the conversations about Dr. Rodriguez, the speculation about her identity, the assumptions about her background. We watched you treat her like an exotic curiosity rather than a colleague in the work of arts education. We also heard the discussions about community programming, the debates about institutional mission, the concerns about maintaining donor support. It was quite educational to see how decisions about our communities are made by people who know nothing about our actual needs or assets." The community members' presence transformed the entire dynamic of the evening. What had been a conversation about them was now a conversation with them, forcing the museum's patrons to confront the reality of the people they claimed to serve. "Dr. Rodriguez," said Victoria Ashworth, who had been notably quiet during the earlier exchanges, "I want to apologize for the speculation about your identity earlier this evening. It was inappropriate and revealed assumptions that I'm now embarrassed to acknowledge." "Mrs. Ashworth," I replied, "I appreciate your apology, but the problem isn't that you didn't recognize me. The problem is that you didn't recognize the communities I represent, the expertise I embody, or the alternatives I offer to your current approach to arts philanthropy." "What would recognition look like?" asked Dr. Williams, her voice suggesting genuine curiosity rather than defensive positioning. "It would look like partnership rather than charity," Sophia answered, before I could respond. "It would look like asking communities what they need rather than deciding what they should want. It would look like sharing power rather than maintaining control. It would also look like acknowledging that artistic excellence exists in our communities, not just in your collections," added Miguel. "That cultural wisdom resides in our neighborhoods, not just in your institutions. That innovation emerges from our experiences, not just from your academic programs." The community members' voices were transforming the conversation from an abstract discussion about institutional policy to a concrete dialogue about power, respect, and genuine collaboration. What specifically would you want to see change? Asked Margaret Whitmore, her question suggesting that she was beginning to understand the seriousness of the challenges being raised. We want to see community members on your board, Carmen replied. We want to see our cultural traditions represented in your programming. We want to see our artists featured in your exhibitions. We want to see our knowledge valued alongside your expertise. Most importantly, Sophia added, we want to see this museum become a genuine community resource rather than a private club that occasionally opens its doors to people like us. As the conversation continued and more community voices joined the dialogue, I realized that the evening had accomplished something unprecedented. The woman in red they had gossiped about had created space for the very communities they claimed to serve, to speak for themselves, to challenge institutional assumptions, and to demand genuine partnership rather than philanthropic condescension. The moral reversal was complete. Those who had been objects of charitable concern had become agents of institutional change. Those who had been excluded from cultural programming had become critics of cultural policy, and those who had been invisible in philanthropic theater had become the stars of a very different kind of performance. The silence that had greeted my revelation was being replaced by something much more powerful, the voices of communities demanding to be heard, respected, and genuinely served by the institutions that claimed to champion their interests. 6 months after the gala that changed everything, I stood in the Metropolitan Museum's newly opened Community Partnership Gallery, watching as local artists installed their work alongside pieces from the museum's permanent collection. The space itself was a testament to how dramatically the institution had transformed walls that once displayed only European masterworks. Now showcased the vibrant creativity of the neighborhoods that surrounded the museum. Dr. Rodriguez Sofia Martinez approached with a clipboard and the confident bearing of someone who had found her voice and learned to use it effectively. The opening reception is tomorrow night, and we have over 400 confirmed attendees from the community. The response has been incredible. Sophia now served as the museum's first community engagement coordinator, a position created in direct response to the demands raised during that memorable evening 6 months earlier. Her hiring had been controversial among some board members, but it had also been necessary if the museum was serious about genuine transformation rather than cosmetic change. Any word from the traditional donor base? I asked, curious about how the museum's wealthy patrons were responding to the institution's new direction. Mixed reactions, Sophia replied honestly. About half have embraced the changes and increased their giving to support community programming. About a quarter have reduced their involvement but haven't withdrawn entirely. And about a quarter have taken their donations elsewhere. How is the board handling the financial impact? Better than expected, actually. The community programming has attracted new funding sources: federal grants, corporate partnerships, foundation support that specifically targets inclusive cultural initiatives. Plus, the increased community engagement has boosted membership and program participation significantly. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. In the weeks following my speech, the museum had faced intense scrutiny from both supporters and critics. Some donors had threatened to withdraw funding unless the institution returned to its traditional programming model. Others had demanded even more radical changes than the museum was prepared to implement. Dr. Rodriguez Miguel Santos appeared with a group of high school students who were participating in the museum's new youth curator program. The students wanted to show you their exhibition proposal before tomorrow's presentation to the board. The Youth Curator program was one of several initiatives that had emerged from the community partnerships established after the gala. Instead of offering traditional art classes that taught students about museum collections, the program empowered young people to research, develop, and present their own exhibitions that reflected their community's cultural wealth. "Tell me about your concept," I said. addressing the group of teenagers who carried themselves with the confidence of people whose ideas were being taken seriously by adults. We're calling it Hidden Histories, Art and Resistance in Our Neighborhoods, explained Maria Gonzalez, a 17-year-old whose grandmother had been one of the community artists featured in my original programs. We've been researching the murals, graffiti, and public art in our communities, documenting how local artists have used visual expression to address social issues and preserve cultural traditions. We've discovered incredible work that's been happening for decades, added David Kim, whose family had emigrated from Korea when he was young. Artists who've been creating sophisticated political commentary, cultural preservation projects, and community beautification initiatives without any institutional support or recognition. The exhibition will feature photographs and documentation of this work alongside interviews with the artists and community members who've been part of these movements, continued Carmen Rodriguez, whose own artwork had been featured in several museum programs over the past 6 months. The students' proposal was sophisticated and well-researched, demonstrating exactly the kind of community-based scholarship that the museum's traditional programming had failed to recognize or support. This sounds like exactly the kind of exhibition that will help people understand the artistic excellence that exists in communities throughout the city, I said. How has the museum staff responded to your proposal? Dr. Williams has been incredibly supportive, Maria replied. She's helped us access research resources and connected us with professional curators who've provided technical guidance. But she's also made it clear that this is our project, not something being done for us or to us. The distinction was crucial, reflecting the museum's evolving understanding of the difference between genuine community partnership and philanthropic condescension. Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Patricia Williams, approached our group with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal transformation. I wanted to update you on the board meeting results from last week. Good news, I hope. Very good news. The board voted unanimously to establish a permanent community advisory council with equal representation from neighborhood organizations, local artists, and cultural groups. They'll have voting power on all programming decisions and budget allocations for community engagement initiatives. The creation of the advisory council represented a fundamental shift in how the museum understood governance and accountability. Instead of making decisions about community programming in isolation, the institution would now be required to collaborate with the communities it served. There's more, Dr. Williams continued. The board also approved a new mission statement that explicitly commits the museum to centering community voices, sharing institutional power, and recognizing the cultural wealth that exists in all neighborhoods of our city. And perhaps most significantly, she added, they've agreed to restructure the annual gala to become a genuine community celebration rather than an exclusive fundraising event for wealthy donors. The announcement about the gala was particularly meaningful, given that the previous year's event had been the catalyst for all the changes that followed. What will the new format look like? Sophia asked. Community-controlled programming, affordable ticket prices, recognition of local artists and cultural workers, and celebration of collaborative achievements rather than individual philanthropy, Dr. Williams explained. Essentially, the opposite of what you experienced 6 months ago. As the afternoon progressed and various community members, museum staff, and board members continued their collaborative work throughout the building, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The woman in red they had gossiped about had become a catalyst for institutional transformation that extended far beyond a single museum or a single evening. Dr. Rodriguez, Margaret Whitmore, appeared with an expression that carried both humility and determination. I wanted to thank you for what happened 6 months ago. Not just for challenging our assumptions, but for showing us a path toward becoming the institution we always claimed to be. What's changed for you personally? I asked. Everything, she replied without hesitation. I've spent the past 6 months visiting community programs, attending neighborhood meetings, and learning about the cultural wealth that exists in communities I'd never bothered to engage with before. I've discovered that my role as board chair isn't to protect the museum from community input, it's to ensure that community voices are centered in everything we do. I've learned that institutional excellence isn't about maintaining exclusivities, about fostering inclusivity. Margaret paused, clearly reflecting on the magnitude of her personal transformation. Most importantly, she continued, I've learned that the communities we claimed to serve were already serving themselves, creating incredible art and preserving important cultural traditions without any help from us. Our job isn't to bring culture to communities, it's to support and amplify the culture that already exists. As the day wound down and I prepared to leave the museum, I took one last look around the Community Partnership Gallery. The walls displayed a vibrant mix of traditional museum pieces and contemporary community artwork, creating visual conversations between different cultural traditions and artistic approaches. But more than the artwork itself, what struck me was the energy in the space, the excitement of community members seeing their cultural traditions represented in a prestigious institution. The engagement of museum visitors discovering artistic excellence they'd never encountered before. The collaboration between professional curators and neighborhood artists working as equals. Dr. Carmen Rodriguez approached one final time, her voice carrying the confidence of someone whose artistic vision was finally being recognized and supported. I wanted you to know that my piece is being acquired for the museum's permanent collection. It's the first work by a community artist to be purchased rather than just borrowed for temporary display. The acquisition was symbolic of the museum's commitment to genuine transformation rather than superficial change. Instead of featuring community artwork as exotic curiosities or educational supplements, the institution was recognizing local artists as peers whose work deserved permanent recognition alongside the masters of European tradition. That's wonderful, Carmen. What does this mean for your artistic practice? It means I can finally call myself a professional artist without feeling like I'm overreaching, she replied. It means my community's cultural traditions are being recognized as sophisticated and valuable. It means young people in my neighborhood can see that their artistic dreams are legitimate and achievable. As I left the museum and walked through the neighborhoods where my community programs continued to flourish, I thought about the evening 6 months earlier when I had been the mysterious woman in red, listening to speculation about my identity while knowing that my true significance lay not in who I was, but in what I represented. The gossip about the guest in red had revealed more about the gossipers than about their subject. Their inability to recognize me had exposed their disconnection from the communities they claimed to serve. Their assumptions about my identity had revealed their limitations in understanding where expertise and excellence actually resided. But most importantly, their eventual recognition of my work had created an opportunity for genuine institutional change that was still unfolding. One collaboration at a time, one exhibition at a time, one transformed relationship at a time. Sometimes the most powerful transformation begins when someone refuses to remain invisible, forcing others to see not just who they are, but who they've been overlooking all along. The woman in red had disappeared, but the communities she represented had finally found their voice, their place, and their power within institutions that had claimed to serve them but had never bothered to listen to them. The recognition had become transformation, and the transformation was just beginning.